Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, November 10th. This is the 4 p.m. Town Council Finance Committee meeting. First is call to order, and I see all members are present. We have Councilor Anderson, Councilor Johnson, and myself. Next order of business is the approval of minutes from September 22nd, 2021. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Any discussion? I only had one point. I think you had attributed the comparative TIF capture rates to Nick Cloutier, and I had brought that to the meeting. And I just didn't want my bad work being attributed to Nick, so.
Same spelling.
I had a very similar comment. I'm glad you brought that up. I was concerned as well.
Very good. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimous. Next, we have a number of items up for discussion. I'm not sure how deep we'll be able to dive into any of them, but the one that's a carryover from last meeting relates to the Higas Parkway, and staff has prepared a presentation to give us a little more flavor into the district, and then I think we'll have a discussion on it. Tom, do you want to go and kick it off?
Yeah, the presentation is probably too strong a representation of what we've done. There's 20-year plus of history associated with the Higas Parkway tax increment financing district. And there's a number of components that I think are critical, and some of those are coming up and will be satisfied shortly, which is, I think, why this conversation is so timely. Long story short, and I'll kind of give it a quick overview first, and we can dive back into the details. But back in 2001 or so, the Higas Parkway TIF was created, and ostensibly the purpose of that was the town was anticipating making fairly serious investment, public dollars into building out infrastructure, really for the purposes of readying that area for economic development. And the TIF district in the first instance was intended to capture additional new tax revenue from new value to help offset debt that the town was going to incur. And in fact, the town incurred debt about just over $10 million in total. And majority of that went to sewer, but there were other utilities in terms of gas, water, telecommunications, as I recall. But the vast majority of that 10 million, I'll say 80% or better, was sewer related expenses, pump station costs and the like, plus all the lines. The intent of the town at the time, and still is to recover those funds in part through TIF revenues, as I said. But the town also imposed sewer assessment fees along the parkway for those that directly benefited, particularly from the sewer installation. And that, assuming that we get full receivables, and we're still working on that, that intends to cover about $4 million of that cost. So the balance, the 6 million or so, is to be covered by TIF revenues. 2 years after the institution of that TIF, the town was approached by a developer for the property that now is Cabela's, and also the property across the street where Golf and Ski and the Beacon was all owned by the original developer Feldco. And the town entered into a credit enhancement agreement. And so the TIF was modified to include the credit enhancement agreement and the financial obligations thereunder. And also we added another allowable cost to cover half of SEDCO expenses at the time. So beyond that, and I think this has been fairly well understood and documented, that district and that kind of economic development experiment really did not materialize, at least how it was originally envisioned. It really languished for well over a decade, almost 15 years, with next to no development. And so over the course of time, the town has had to honor its debt obligations. Our bondholders expect to be paid, and they have been. The CEA obligations is a contractual obligation, so that is satisfied first. And so essentially there was not sufficient TIF revenues to cover the debt service cost once you satisfy those two kind of legal obligations first. And so over the course of time, whatever's left over, we have put toward annual debt costs related to that $10 million or so. And whatever we didn't have, the general fund covered. And that deficit, if you will, due to the general fund has grown to about $3 million at this point. And that whole issue has been a real drag on our finances. It's been a subject of discussion every time we've gone back out to issue, and every subsequent issue after that. And we did some work back in the 5 or 6 years ago to restructure some of that debt, which has helped us a little bit. The good news is next year is our final CEA payment to satisfy that obligation fully, as well as our final debt service payment. And so it begs the question, why I think it's opportune for this group to talk about it is the TIF will extend as currently written till 2028. And what do we do with, if anything, with the TIF, after we've met those legal obligations? And I guess I'll stop there, and I can go back to areas that I've glossed over.
Yeah, well, I know I have some questions, but if anybody wants to help there.
Yeah, just to maybe understand as I read through the stuff, kind of really the decision we're trying to focus on right now. Can you hear me okay? So it seems like those legal obligations will end. And then by 2025, if we use those TIF revenues, then the debt would be covered. So it's really between 2025 and 2028 where we need to make a decision in terms of what do we want to do, because at that point we won't have any obligation, but we could either keep sheltering those funds and use them for other economic development efforts in that district, or we could end the TIF early and just all that money would flow into the general fund.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, and I suppose your point's well taken, that there really, as currently constructed, there's nothing the town needs to do. When those legal obligations are met, we will pay the town back first and foremost, which will take a couple of years based on projection of TIF revenues. And Nick's here to explain some of his work, just looking forward in that regard. But I believe you're right, Councillor, by 2025, all of those needs would have been satisfied, and therein will be a decision. There's certainly shelter benefits that continue to accrue to the extent that we want to keep TIF up and running. Mm-hmm. I should have mentioned, though, we're able to cover up to half of SEDCO expense since 2006. We never have, because we've never had enough to meet the CEA obligations and cover debt, either one of those two, much less pay half of those expenses. It may be worth looking at, certainly starting to do that, or maybe even paying ourselves back potentially. And I don't have an answer whether that paying ourselves back is legal, but that's certainly something we can find out.
It is, we've done it in the past.
Yeah.
I thought so as well. Can we dive into the $10 million? You said we had $10 million of debt. 4 million or in change was covered or attributed to special assessment for sewer. Does that include interest or is that just the?
It's principal amount.
That was the total amount of the bond orders that were authorized. And I
So it
think
was the debt, so it doesn't include the interest. So when we accrue and we're paying ourselves back, that 3 million number, it doesn't include the 6 or 7 million that we paid in interest on the bond.
it includes whatever we should have been paying the general fund. What we actually paid the general fund that we did to cover some portion of the debt. But it also created that deficit in the special revenue fund, so.
So
So the
Ruth,
general fund's eating that cost until we can make good.
maybe said another way, is the expectation that TIF revenues cover all principal and interest expense related to that debt, or is it simple principal amount only?
The amount that we've been covering, transferring in from the TIFs doesn't cover either. It covers a portion of both, but the 10 million that we're talking about here excludes the interest at this point.
It's just the debt.
But
It's
we've
just the
been paying
principal
the
amount.
interest on the
Yeah.
general fund, so.
So I guess that's something I'd want to understand a little more. To me, it feels like the town really should be paying ourselves back for that principal and interest. And that might extend out the time horizon. here.
The only thing that might adjust this is, I believe my numbers are through June 2021, so we do have that extra year of interest, debt payment and transfer in, so that will probably adjust that number a little
Well,
bit.
these aren't exact, but you'll look, there's a schedule in the development program. This was really done for purposes of the TIF program. This looks at, total expenses, about 15.5 million.
That's where I was getting the disconnect.
Yeah.
I couldn't reconcile the $3 million accrual versus that 15.6 million.
And I'll have to look back, but I'll be shocked if this development program doesn't allow us to cover both principal and interest.
Yeah, I believe it would. And this year was the first time we've actually used TIF revenues to pay down debt service, right?
No, we've been using it every year since 2006.
Can we get a schedule of how much each year we've,
I have one here if you want, I'll make some copies. And we used to do what the actual debt payments were, but then it was creating too big of a deficit in the special revenue fund, so they dropped it down, and we've been fairly consistent. It's in debt service revenues. It's the 370,000 that you might see there. That's what's been coming across, but I'll make a picture of this.
so that's what's been coming across each year.
So that goes to help offset the debt but not fully.
Okay, so that was a piece that I was missing as well.
So just to track with what Counselor Clucci is asking, what is the total amount that we owe to ourselves potentially if we account for the principal and the interest that we haven't?
As of June 30, like I said, it was 3 million, roughly about 3 million, 2.9, yeah, 3.3 million.
Does that
right
include
now.
interest expense as well?
That includes everything.
Okay.
And then, but then it's gonna, I think, increase because of this year and then next year's debt payment. So unless we start reimbursing ourselves more than just the 370.
Okay, so it sounds like you have a reconciliation that goes back from the beginning of the district.
We did save some interest though, because we refunded some of the bonds. And so that saved on quite a bit of interest. I just don't have that number.
So that part makes it complicated, okay.
Mhm.
No, I think that, I think that makes sense. Just for some clarity question, for some clarity, currently, for instance, like the current budget cycle we're in right now, we're still going to the general fund to offset to make our payment to the CEA, correct? And is that to the tune of like the $160,000? Is that?
Well, the CEA is,
Not the
the
CEA.
CEA is what, 800?
Yeah, it caps out on an annual basis of
Of
820 825 and overall aggregate 8.25 million.
Correct. And we're making those payments in full
To them.
did like last year's TIF revenue cover that? Okay.
They're
Right.
just now getting, I think this year they maxed out at 825.
Yeah.
Last year
Last-
they did as well.
Last year.
So there's a couple things going on. not only are we coming to the end of the CEA, coming to the end of the TIF district possibly in a few years, right? But we've also just started to pay the full amount that we owed anyways without covering it from the general fund.
It's worth noting, the Beacon project is what pushed it over the edge. It created 55, I don't know what, $50+ million in value that really made it perform to the point that we're now enjoying.
So all of the taxes collected on Cabela's and
Beacon
Gateway or
Yeah,
Beacon have been going back
to the developer.
to the developer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now there's a little bit of a surplus.
Yeah.
We're collecting a
Yeah.
little more than they need.
Yeah.
And then.
But then that payment's gonna drop off. And the question is,
Exactly.
we're gonna
There are
pay,
other properties in that TIF district that don't pertain to the credit enhancement agreement. So those are the pieces that are coming.
but they're still in the district. We're still capturing 100%.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
and like, is just for my own clarity, is Foley's Fitness in there? Is that, okay, is the Rock Gym in the TIF district? Okay, so I'm just making sure I can understand it geographically.
Yeah,
So-
geographically, the total TIF district is 365 acres, 375, excuse me. And about 80 acres is the subject of the credit enhancement agreement.
That makes sense.
But majority of value in the overall district is within that 80 acres, let's be honest.
And we don't, and if I'm hearing this right, Tom, you're not 100% comfortable saying we can retroactively pay for Sedco if we want to. Ruth
You
appears to
seem
be pretty
pretty confident.
confident. Councilor Cucci feels like he's relatively confident, so it's certainly a possibility. If we wanted to.
I think it's
Yeah.
something that's worth exploring.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We took a bet and we spent a lot of effort and time and it didn't work out, but I don't see any reason why. It's not a monetary transaction. We're
Yeah.
just gonna capture that value for a little bit longer to get some of the tax shift benefit.
Sure. Yeah.
We're still a loser for us.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I was musing over earlier is, is there an opportunity? We have a $3 million debt we're paying back to ourselves. Okay, so is there an opportunity, once everything falls off, can we actually, let's say it's 1 point, because I think the assessors is very conservative. He's saying it's about a $1.2 million a year in captured tax. I think according to your table. Using some pretty conservative, right? And that's using no Beacon expansion, that's using a flat tax rate.
It'll be more than that,
Right.
but that's the conservative.
So for simplicity, I'm gonna call it 1.5. So I think one of the things I was trying to explore was, do we pay ourselves back on a slightly longer schedule? Because if we took $1 million over 3 years and paid ourselves back, would that allow us the opportunity to take a $500,000 and put it towards Sedco retroactively? And that would actually be a boost to the general fund instead of an accounting shift. Am I correct in thinking that? That's my question, because I think that might be at least worth exploring, because you could do some immediate property tax relief if we did that. Or do I not understand that correctly?
Yeah, I don't know from an accounting point of view how that payment for tax, Sedco expenses that have already been covered, but
Right.
paid for, there's no receivable in the books. Is that just, is that received as annual revenue?
Special revenue or something like that, right?
I
The way
suspect
I'm
it is.
thinking about it, it's really a Nick thing. When he said, fills in how much was captured in the sense to the state, just for the municipal valuation. Internally, I think they'd be eliminating entries. I don't know that there would be a fiscal impact, but you would get the shelter benefit for that.
Well, I don't know if that's, well, I guess if you redirected all 1.5 taxes to pay off our $3 million, that's currently what we're discussing. And because we have a debit and a credit on our balance sheet, we have a debit we owe ourselves 3 million, and that's credited somewhere in a fund balance account. So I guess my point is, Sedco isn't running a accounts receivable against
They
itself,
don't, right?
right? So
Yeah, where does that money go?
where does that money go? Because that is real money. That is real tax.
To go to fund balance or to receive it?
Right. I guess I can ask Ruth now that she's back.
Yeah.
And then I'll stop talking, but
Thank you.
I'll wait for her to sit down, so I'm not just yelling at her as she's walking around the room.
Another potential logistic issue, maybe Shauna could speak to is, I believe the TIF says that if there is more than enough money, or there's an order of operations, you
Yeah.
pay the debt first
Sure.
until you've paid the amount you
All
need
right.
to.
So that might just answer my question, because it might be moot because we have to pay the debt. But is it bond debt versus debt to ourselves? That's a distinction as well. Ruth, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So we're going to come out of this, for lack of a better term, we're going to come out of this owing ourselves $3 million. and capturing and collecting about $1.5 million in taxes a year. So we could, in theory, pay ourselves off back in roughly 2 years, once everything's in the rearview mirror. If we opted to say, hey, we're only gonna pay ourselves back $1 million a year, and then take 500,000 and retroactively pay for Sedco, would that, instead of an accounting shift between the, hey, the credit and the debit with the fund balance and the money we owe to ourselves, would that actually more directly flow to the general fund and give property tax relief? Because Sedco is not running an accounts receivable against us, because did that make,
Assuming we can do that, which,
assuming we could do it, do I understand that correctly?
correct, it would go, well, it's just like this, we've been budgeting for the debt. We've
Yeah.
been budgeting for Sedco. We didn't estimate any revenues. Usually if we don't collect the revenues in the operating budget,
Right.
the deficit or the surpluses just go to fund balance, whichever way it goes. So that would continue to happen.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's either way, you're putting it back into the general
No,
fund balance.
okay.
I mean, just like, what I hear what you're saying, wouldn't we just then, oh wait, so you're suggesting we pay back ourselves retroactively for Sedco,
Right.
not just, okay.
We don't have some, I'm using credit and debit backwards, but we don't have some credit on the balance sheet because we've been running a quote deficit with Sedco. Sedco has been fully funded by the taxpayers outside of this TIF district.
Mhm,
So, right, so we don't owe ourselves anything for Sedco.
mhm.
So I guess my question is, if that's the case, and all of a sudden we have this new special revenue column that's $500,000 because we decided we're gonna pay ourselves back for Sedco, wouldn't that go more directly to the taxpayer, so to speak, for those 3 years? That's.
I'd like to think about it further. But my gut tells me I'd rather have it come to benefit the fund balance, because I think that's a equally important goal.
Yeah.
The danger I see in bringing it in as a revenue through the annual budget process is that it's going to go away in 3 years. And yes, I guess it could be to the benefit of the taxpayer to keep rates lower than they would be otherwise, or we could choose to spend it. One way or another, that money's going to go away in 4 years out.
Well, I don't know if I agree, because once the TIF district's gone, then that tax revenue will be flowing to the fund balance.
Additionally,
I'll stop one second.
I think the other TIFs or credit enhancement agreements.
Have the same
like
ability.
We could turn on, use up as much of Higas as we
We could open the
could.
spigot on downtown to
Yeah.
fill in the. to
Yeah,
fill it in.
right.
But
Okay, that's fine.
The other
But the-
thing, if we couldn't go back, we might be able to amend this year's budget and of course, work on it for next year and use the monies
Yeah.
of this year's budget.
My only angle is there an immediate opportunity to give some property tax relief? If if we're paying minimal interest on bonds, that was, actually would be minimal interest on ourselves at this point.
So I think you get it over a couple of years.
Yeah.
Through the tax shift.
That's
You know,
true.
By
too.
capturing.
Yeah.
The full value.
That's fair. Yeah.
The other thing to think about is this is a 25-year TIF. It could be extended to be a 30-year TIF, and then that increased assessed value, you can keep sheltering it in the same way as long as you have things to.
Allowable uses.
Allowable.
We'd have to just amend the allowable uses as well.
Possibly, or if these add up to enough to get you a couple more years, it might be a combination.
I think we had to amend the Eight Corners Sewer District for this reason. So
Oh,
that we
I
could
haven't even
continue to
looked at
pay
that.
ourselves back. once-
Okay.
Yeah, we extended 3 more years to make sure we covered.
Is that one closed? That one's closed.
And that was
now?
closed, yes.
So just a quick question, are we currently sheltering 100% of the value from there? Is it just the 62%?
I can speak to that. So for all the years except for the last 3 years, it was 100%. And then my predecessor used 62% based on a reading of an interpretation of the TIF district. And I followed suit with what he had done, but we followed up with Shauna and the state, and there's no requirement to do 62%, but rather it was projected that that might be the case, but Shauna specifically saw on page 9 and 10 that what is actually the method is the amount we need to pay ourselves. And the 62% was just an estimate to project, but we're not required to do that. So that was an error that we didn't capture 100% for the past 3 years based on a misunderstanding. So we were under capturing for 3 years, but the prior 20 or however many it was, we were capturing 100%.
But
these-
going
these-
forward, it's going to be 100.
Correct. Yeah,
These
starting next year.
projections in your numbers are 100%.
Correct, yeah.
And it was, so it was 62% for the non-New England Expedition parcels, right? The New England Expedition parcels, you were capturing at 100%.
Correct, yeah, until the maximum amount, yeah. But moving forward, it will be 100% of every increased assessed value as we're allowed, and we could have been doing, but didn't for the past 3 years.
And this was one of the 3 pages in the packet that I printed
Mhm.
was yours, which I thought was very helpful. And this is where I was getting confused. When you say cumulative Higas TIF revenues,
From now, moving forward.
okay,
Not
but it's
prior.
not the prior, that's where,
The cumulative and the highest is 1.7 something million.
Which
So-
is on one of your
it's
sheets.
this one, yeah, okay,
So this is above and beyond that each year moving forward.
okay. This is from this point.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And then what Paul was mentioning is the 1.2 each year, 1.5 rounded up is the projection for once the CEA is completed.
Okay.
Just change.
I was gonna say something changed.
It sounds to me that at least this group sees the benefit of at least running the table to 2028, the current term, if not extending beyond that for shelter benefit alone.
Yeah, to
I
the
was-
extent that we already have,
But to
Right,
do
that's
so, we're going to
identified.
need to make sure we have qualified reasons to spend all the revenue that's produced.
Yeah.
Well,
That-
I'll-
That would be my question is, do we have that list or is there one that you guys are starting to put together that would indicate it would be better for us to continue to shelter those versus just sending them to the general fund earlier?
well, I think we've demonstrated in prior discussions that the shelter benefits are sizable. They're 58%, 58 cents on the dollar or some such thing. And again, if there are legitimate qualified uses, such as paying ourselves back for the last 15 years of half of Sedco's expense, and perhaps others that you want to expand into, it seemed like a no-brain financial decision.
Mhm.
I think we'd come out much to the benefit by continuing to shelter it as long as we can.
so it would be an indirect benefit to the general fund.
Well, I mean, I see that and I hear we're talking about paying back ourselves in Sedco, but that's not adding up to me to the total opportunity. And so I think that's where it's just,
Right.
what is that other 2.5 million that we would want to make sure we have those economic development
Yeah.
programs available. Otherwise, we should probably put it back in the general fund and cancel it earlier. So it's really just, to me, a question of what is that list? Do we have a list? And does that make sense that we continue to do this? And
Yeah,
without that-
we've not gone through that exercise, but we certainly can. Chairman Johnson, in the past couldn't wait to get his hands on this 1.5 million coming back to the jungle. Hadn't given much thought to it.
That's true. I have been pretty aggressive with it.
I mean, I'm
Which
sure there's
shouldn't get-
stuff. I just feel like we should kind of start to have, like, I loved how when we did the TIF exercise, you guys gave us kind of that list of
Yep.
things that were examples, and just being able to know we have those, I think will help us and the council ultimately make a decision of, do we keep this going or do we cancel it early if we pay back ourselves and can do the Sedco thing?
The good news is, it looks like FY '23, we don't need to do anything right away. We've got sufficient debt expense and we still owe money to the general fund. So it's not an urgent decision, but I'm glad we're having the conversation now.
Are you good with that? Where we're leaving that, Paul?
Yeah, I think I am. Yeah, I appreciate everybody humoring me for the 1.5 discussion. I think John Anderson probably articulated more. I think my bottom line was, we're exploring a lot of these opportunities in the downtown area, which abuts the Higas Parkway area, right? So, although there's clear benefits to sheltering 100% of this, I don't want to tie myself in knots to try to come up with the reasons to as well. If this could just be, hey, let's cut this thing loose and let's let it flow to the general fund and enjoy the fruits of that, right? So that would be my only, because right now we have 2 things listed on that TIF application, Sedco and the CEA
And debt.
and debt, right? And so all of that's going away and all we have left is Sedco, and it would be up to us to figure out, hey, what else are we going to spend this on? Qualified expenses. And we're going through that exercise with such a large portion of our town, especially valuation wise. Maybe we could be okay to say, you know what, maybe, I guess at first going into this conversation, I thought it was a no brainer to extend it until 30 years. I guess after this conversation, I don't know if there's anything compelling in the Higas Parkway district that, but to be determined. We'll see how, I think the Downs exercise that we're doing, or the downtown, I shouldn't say, the downtown area exercise we're doing will give us a little more insight to that.
So this is where, and just a random thought.
Yeah, I'm,
You're gonna have a connection to the downtown through Higas.
sure.
Right? And that's gonna require road and infrastructure and, that's already an approved use. That's something that we've already got filed.
Yep.
So what the Downs might want something from us, right? Well, that's how you can work a deal where it benefits both of you, because we can, get 60 cents on the dollar for funding it that way.
Yeah.
There might be some things that are valuable to us that they can do for
Sure.
cheaper as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, there might be an opportunity that presents itself. I just don't have the tools to come up with a magical one right now, but we shouldn't. We should wait and see.
Yeah.
So,
And a lot of the qualified uses that Shauna went over and shared were similar things that I think you guys shared before, like the public safety debt would qualify out of this fund still too. So I know we talked about that with the
Sure.
downtown TIF, but we could also use funds here if we
Right.
wanted to cover that debt. The one thing that I think would be interesting to better explore, just from my perspective, is, we talk a lot about development, and lately I've been having a lot of conversations with people where they've been talking more about conservation and things like that. And I feel like if we can figure out how do we use some of these funds too to really make sure we're looking at that side of the equation, and maybe trying to make sure we're thinking about how can we use these funds. Because I know one of the qualified uses was also environmental improvement funds. So again, I don't think that's within the TIF district. I think that could be outside of the TIF district. So is there, again, something there we can explore strategically about, probably not just this TIF, but the downtown one too, of like, how do we use these monies to really help with environmental aspects and conservation aspects that, I feel like that's what I often hear when people are concerned about development. It's like, but what about conservation and land and trails? And it's like, we have an opportunity with some of these funds to address that proactively. So I think it would be interesting to explore that further of what are some projects or some things we might want to do in that arena.
I think that exploration will equally benefit the downtown discussion
Yeah,
too.
I agree.
Yeah, the whole shelter benefit, the challenge with that is, if this tax revenue, TIF revenue comes into the general fund and is used for the common good, it's very easy. Here it is, it's a direct benefit to the taxpayers. Either we do something new with that money or we drive down the tax rate. The shelter benefit, of course, is kind of shadowy, and it's in, increased subsidy from the state, and it's less county tax, and there's no single number to point to, and it's really hard to correlate that kind of direct benefit to the bottom line. And that's just part of the challenge, I think, with these things.
Yeah, but if we determine we could do a 20th of the debt service of the public safety building, because, the Beacon has 600 people in it, right? I mean, it's not insignificant. So if we can make a case that 20% of the debt service of the public safety building can, we also at any time we've been told repeatedly, and it's the truth, we could adjust it down to capturing 50% if, I guess my point is, just because it's there doesn't mean we have to necessarily use the vehicle if we're exhausting that in a bunch of different areas. So and again, same thing as you, I'm just brainstorming, but
One thought that comes to mind is there is a difference between the downtown and the Higas
Right.
TIF districts. The downtown omnibus TIF can be used for a lot more things,
correct.
including outside of the district, whereas the Higas is far more limited, but
Yeah.
We can explore, do a similar exercise within the constraints of that district, what the allowable uses are. But Paul's right. I mean, right now it's 100%. If we can't find qualified uses to spend all the money, maybe dial that percentage back to something less. So there's some flows back and some shelter benefit accrues, but not 100%.
So your plan was already for the downtown to come back with the proposed project cost or something sometime in the.
Yeah, I wanted to catch up with you. I'm not sure what the next step is in that, but yes, I think there's certainly follow-up discussions to be had. I think we made great progress. I'd like to map out what the next step is.
And then before we get to budget season, like in February or so, we need to determine what our capture rate will be for.
and Shauna had mentioned that something about the February deadline
Yeah.
of, submitting documents to the state if we want to change any of the uses as well, or laundry list of things we can spend the funds on.
That timeline is, in my mind, specific to the downtown discussion. My impression is we don't need to do anything on the Higas Parkway for FY '23. But I think certainly for FY '24, we need to be in a position to know what the next step is.
You guys ready to move on?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, so that wasn't so bad. I feel like we got pretty deep into it. I understand it a lot better now, so thank you guys for all of that. And particularly this, I don't know if it's possible to add it to the agenda packet afterwards, but this was the piece that I was missing, and that's the history of funds coming into and out of that account. The next item was, it relates to an exemption request that we received as a town from the Crossroads Holdings, the Scarborough Downs development. And it was an exemption against their GMO or growth management ordinance. There was a pretty lengthy memo that was attached to it that detailed the request. And one of the things I thought as a finance committee, it would be good for us to start getting our arms around was there's some assertions of the net fiscal impact for different property types. And I don't know if we could bring that up. on the screen.
Attachment 2, page 5 or 6.
Liam, do you mind bringing that up and sharing the screen too? So if you're watching YouTube, you can see it.
This is YouTube. This is what's actually.
He's co-hosting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So this is the one that I'm looking at. I think it's attachment
Attachment
2. There you go. So for example, this is saying that total revenues for 1,000 square foot residential condo would be expected to be $3,047 per year. It might be small, but that's near that's the top line that I'm reading. It says the total cost for that use is $1,238, which calls out net fiscal impact or benefit of $1,809. Kind of parlaying on the discussion we just had, when I look at this, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, but right now, 40% of that revenue is going back to the developer. So when I look at the 347, that's really, you should really multiply that by 60% to
0.6,
say what the town's going to get. And then with the tax shift implications, you should really be multiplying it by what, 52% or 42%. That's what we're going to have left over to service the actual, fire, police, community services, library. So when you do that calculation, just this is my, top of my head, the benefits aren't as big as it looks here. And what I thought it would make sense for us to do as a committee or future committees is we might need some help validating some of these numbers because I'm not sure that they're fully accurate. And I wanted to talk with you guys about how do we do that?
Yeah.
I don't want to base it on my intuition or mental math either. I think there's probably something we can do to and this we've been talking about updating our impact fees for a while now. This is the first step to doing that is understanding your cost to serve. So you might nail a couple of birds with one stone there.
Yeah, one thing I think that I would just be curious to do, because my understanding is they came up with these numbers based on our assumptions that as a town in terms of what the cost to serve is.
Mhm.
So when's the last time we revisited that model and updated it to see if that's still the right model, or are there things that we want to change? And then the other thing with this particular approach to that, and I may be overthinking this, so this might be going a step too far, was when I think of what's going to happen at the Downs, like if you look at the Downs as a vacuum, maybe this makes sense, but when you consider the fact that the Downs is going to have implications on the broader community in terms of like how many people are going to migrate from their current single family homes to an apartment, and then that single family home is going to be filled with another family, like the total cost of the town might actually be different. So again, that might be taking it a step too far, but like really understanding like what is the true fiscal impact, not just within the Downs as a vacuum, but really considering the implications that the Downs is going to have on the broader, town of Scarborough.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you create a model that goes that deep and is that exacting. To answer your first question, yes, they are using our cost to serve model. This was developed as part of the evaluation of the CEA. The model is based on actual budget costs, and these are probably 3 years old. I think it's fair to say, though, that yes, they need to be updated, and we can do that. You might recall, we're looking for consulting assistance. I've also asked for kind of a check-in on the methodology that we use, kind of a real gut check on, are we doing this the right way in the first instance? But I think it's fair to say that even with those outdated costs, they probably do fall in the same rank order. They're all similarly outdated. And I guess that's the point I would make, though these dollar figures, this is very, very specific to the dollar, which leads one to believe that it's very exact. I think it's fair to say that the rank order that's produced out of this methodology is of some use to the extent that we can direct what kind of development happens where. Typically, we don't have that privilege. We set a series of permitted uses, and whatever happens with the landowner's wishes within conformance with zoning happens. The difference here is that we have potentially the ability to direct a more preferable type of development, whether it produces these exact ROI benefits, or not. I think this does represent a rank order that's meaningful in the discussion.
So real quick, I believe this is net of the 40%. So I think this is an incredibly important distinction.
Okay.
Right? So I think residential condos, that would be a $200,000 residential condo. I believe that's 60% of I believe that's net
So
of the
that's
40.
already the 60.
Yeah, if you look at the title, it says net fiscal impact. Just doing some quick reverse math, right? Look at the single family 3-bedroom. They only have $3,700 in net revenue there. My taxes are $6,000 and I live in an average house. So those numbers are already net of the 40%. Yeah. And I believe Peter has said it a few times in public because this is a familiar ask, right? We've seen this a couple times. I just want to make sure we're all in agreement before I just throw that out there, but doing some quick
If
math.
we're so, but we can verify.
Yeah, so like that 3,000 that's 60% of taxes. That's not,
That'd be closer to 5. Yeah.
yeah. Just so I still agree that there's some other things we should discuss here, but I just, it's a big difference between saying this is not, so.
So I didn't pick up from reading this memo. They attributed it to Des Moines. Des Moines is probably taking stuff that we've done in the past. Is that?
On the cost side, the value per unit type is numbers that they produced.
So if I wanted to understand the methodology, would we bring in somebody from town staff or Crossroads or Des Moines to kind of walk us through it?
Karen Martin certainly has the ability, I think, to demonstrate what's here.
That might be a place
Yeah.
to start too. I don't know if you want to do that when you bring a consultant on board.
Yeah, I've seen, and frankly, it was only through a couple of emails with residents back a couple of years ago, but Karen had a 6-page explanation of mileage, the roadways, which I think is interesting. I think we should talk about it as a committee just to refresh it. And frankly, it didn't really see the light of day. I think it saw the light of day because a couple of residents poked her and said, hey, they asked the same question, give us the methodology.
Mhm.
So I think all of us here would appreciate hearing it from start to finish from her. So I think one of the things we should do is start there. So yeah, I agree. So again, this is net of 40. I don't know if it's net of 43, right? Because we're doing 3% as well.
But the town gets that 3%.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Yeah.
But it doesn't include the tax share.
Yeah, but I do think, a lot of times you see the glossy, high level stuff, and sometimes it'd be interesting, to solidify some of the things we're hearing. I'd like to see this a little bit.
Well, I would just like to understand the assumptions only because I think part of their rationale for the exemption or their big point is the value that they bring to the town. So I think just really, even though, this might be a number, is this the right number? Is it directionally correct? Like, are they undervaluing themselves potentially?
Right.
Like, just maybe it's not big enough and we really need somebody to help us understand that. Like, I have a hard time thinking of, is what we've done historically, is that the right model, or are there different assumptions when you consider that this is gonna be the downtown and there's gonna be, you know, more value there potentially. And so is it really gonna be different? And this is kind of undercutting? Like, I would just be curious from Nick, in like an area like the Downs that we're trying to develop, do those care, like, should this look different than, you know, if that wasn't part of Scarborough and the other parts of Scarborough, if that makes any sense? Like, it's like the notion of a downtown with high density mixed uses in this small area. Should these numbers actually be higher? Because theoretically, it would make sense that the cost to serve for those would be lower, but also the value would be a lot higher, I'm guessing.
I can't speak to the cost to serve. I think Tom already addressed, that could be looked at, but in terms of the valuation, I too would want to know the assumptions that they utilized. I think we're all good at guessing based on the outcome, what might have happened, but I think if it's not outlined in this document, we would need to see those assumptions. And I don't want to guess, but they do seem a little low for the total revenues, but I don't know what assumptions they're using.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, if they're going to err low in the revenues is probably the appropriate way to be. Unlike the CEA discussion where they didn't have any units in the market, at least they have probably some of all of the different residential types that they're displaying here. So my guess, and I shouldn't assume anything here, is that their revenue numbers are based on actual sale prices that they've participated in over the last 3 years. That they actually have numbers to forecast from. I will say, back with the CEA discussion and this cost to serve model, we did have it validated by an outside expert that we hired. That's not to say it shouldn't be looked at, and another set of professional eyes gives us their opinion. And that's why we've included it in the scope of work for this next consultant as well. And the updating of numbers, I'll certainly have Karen available to this committee. I think she can answer a lot of it. There was a very detailed analysis with consultants and also a lot of the senior staff in terms of the different types and attributing different municipal services depending on the development types. Light industrial doesn't have any school kids, obviously, but they have truck traffic and so on and so forth. So the model does I think a pretty good job of really appreciating the differences and then attributing actual costs from our budget.
So I guess what I'm taking away is it'd be helpful to understand the assumptions. I'm kind of like you, John. When I look at this, I say, yeah, you know what? Letting you build is you're putting money in our pockets. But then I'm like, yeah, but is it really that rosy? I think to make a determination on the exemption or not, we need to understand the details of what's going into that.
But Councilor, if I could, your assumption is that nothing would happen. I would agree with you that would be true if they did nothing. But the fact is something's going to happen there. And I think the point that I want to make sure we don't lose sight of is to the extent that we can guide what happens, and what happens, different development types mean different things to our bottom line, I think is the salient point here. Whether these numbers are exact, I think is a fair point to question. But it seems to me your argument assumes that nothing would happen otherwise.
I think for me, it's more, is that something, whatever that something is, actually worth the exemption or not? And so I think there is something. It's just making sure we know what that something, like we feel really
That's the
confident
point.
with that
That's
something.
I think the point they're trying to make is that of all the things we could do, which everything in the blue box are permitted uses, what we're proposing to do is some of the most advantageous to the town. I think that's the takeaway. That's my impression of it.
I would tend to agree, but before I said yes, I'd want to understand. I don't need to understand all the alternatives. Because they could go build 44 single-family homes a year for the next 20 years and it'd be like, there you go, done. Close the book. Or we can do something grander or different, more along the lines of what they're proposing. But the fact is they have to ask us to do some of these things, and to give a decent response, I feel like I need to understand it.
I echo all of that. I think that also, I mean, you're trying to walk the line between, you don't want to get into complete analysis rabbit holes, right? And keep saying, yeah, but, right? But do I think this is directly correct? I do, but I also think that when you're creating an entity that's brand new, it's something that, we've never experienced as a town. We've never served the downtown as a town, right? So I think that, are some of these assumptions that Karen has, and this is not, are they based off Scarborough and based off the character of Scarborough? We're doing something that is completely out of character of Scarborough. It's going to have its own set of costs. It's certainly going to have its own sets of benefits. And, to the point of a consultant, I'd really like to have somebody that has experience of, these are, I've said it before, and I don't mean to say it flip, but their planned development it's manufactured. So we're manufacturing this in a case. So this has been done before a lot down south, Virginia, right? So what are, of course, there must have been surprise costs, or now that there is very easy to pinpoint costs that weren't factored in. I mean, that, again, I don't need to go down a rabbit hole, but, there's a difference between, in my opinion, I feel like there could be a difference between one multifamily that we have off Muzzy Road and Carrier Woods versus a whole built out downtown, right? So what are those costs? Because, does our police force increase more than we expected, right? Yes, it's only 8 miles to plow, but is there something, are there other, you're adding all sorts of new elements to Scarborough. Let's understand those elements a little bit more. We can't predict the future, but I think that I would like to have somebody that has experience with, give me somebody that's worked with 500 acres, has a population of about 3,000 to 5,000 people, that has, 1 million square feet in commercial, give or take, and let's see how that shook out. Where was it? And let's see how it worked. I mean, that's what I think would be great value from a consultant. So,
I agree.
yeah. I mean, this is new to us, but it's certainly not new. These are done all over the place. So
I don't think there's as many good examples as you think there are. I mean, the downtown committee did some really good work and found some good examples to look to. I don't know that they went that fine grained. But there's still some unanswered questions, whether the town has ownership interest and therefore maintenance responsibility of the town green and
right,
the streets for that matter.
Right.
I mean, those conversations we just kind of scratched the surface on, and we
Right.
had to determine
Right.
ultimately.
And, and again, you look at, it's clear that the green space is a green space and not a park. Okay, well, we're doing a significant growth in our population, and we have Memorial Park that is clearly been incredibly busy since COVID, right? So, those are, if we don't have a park if the green space isn't a park, well, the people that move into the downs need a park somewhere, right? I think those are all things that we need to tie into the RFP we're doing for the master facilities plan, right? The reality of it is those types of, the downs isn't as self-contained as perhaps we'd like to think it would be sometimes, right? It's not. And so those are the things
And just
asking.
To layer into that a little bit, what would be interesting from a consultant who has experience with some things like this would be to better understand the correlation or impact to this based on the square footage of the downtown, right?
Yeah.
'Cause I think right now they're proposing X square feet. If that were to double, what would it look like? If it were to shrink, what would it look like? Just to know, like, the downtown that they're proposing, which is one of the benefits, like, are we really optimizing the financial impact to the town with what they're proposing? Or is there a different shape where we could be getting more downtown space, more commercial space in that area, where they can also still do really well from a financial perspective, from a housing, but we can also get maybe a little bit more on the downtown front?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to be careful that we don't overstate how, I mean, I think we have an opportunity to shape things. We've got something right here that they desperately need and want, it appears. But at the end of the day, there's the Crossroads district zoning. The land is privately owned. Yes, we've created some incentives for them to hit certain benchmarks within the CEA, but beyond that, it's incumbent on the private developer to come through and seek and receive approvals and to build in conformance with current land use and other regulations. So I don't want to overstate how influential we can be and tell them exactly what they're going to build and how they're going to build it, because I don't think we have that ability.
I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent would be to help us better evaluate what they're putting forward, right? Like, is this really the best deal that the town could get? And since they're asking for exemptions from our ordinances, knowing that would help us better evaluate to say, yeah, this is a good deal. or no, we need something else, or we need a little bit more because we have better information that helps us evaluate what's in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, just personally, it's a little bit off topic, but what I was anticipating when we put the GMO together was that the exemption request would look something like, I want to build this building or these 5 buildings. There's 300 units in them. This is what, rendering what it might look like. And we'd say, oh, yeah, that's, or no, but this is a little higher level than I think I was anticipating. So we're making good, bad, or indifferent. They requested it, so we need to give it its due attention. But
I think we just did a better job of writing the RFP than when we wrote the RFP. Can we just retract? No, here, watch this tape. Can you? No, it's all in there. Look, and I know if I was staff, I'd like, well, we can't, that's a million things. I think a lot of us, we're just kind of wondering out loud about some of this stuff too. So I think just to make that clear, I mean, these are the types of questions that are going on in my head. It's
we're saying them out loud so that
Right.
everybody can hear. We're gonna go
right,
through a
right.
process.
So.
Okay. So we didn't identify a process, but it sounds like there's consensus that it's going to hinge around some outside support. I think we nailed it with, when you were talking about bringing somebody who's had eyes on this type of thing before. And maybe understanding the details of what they proposed to us, but probably even more so on, bringing somebody who's looked at this thing before, this type of thing before.
Yeah, and I think I think we did a good job of it, but I think Counselor Johnson's expressed, we're not here to talk about the exemption request. We're just here to talk about those assumptions you see on the screen as a finance committee, right? And I think having Ruth come in or somebody just, Karen, that would be, I think it'd be super helpful. And like I said, I've read the emails that she's written and, but I think that's a good first step. I would think we could do that before we had a consultant. Obviously, Karen and the consultant should work together. But if we're meeting again in 2 weeks or a month, let's have Karen just, have a casual conversation with us to help us.
I can have.
Yeah.
That's just something that may have predated us.
Yeah. Should we also ask the Downs to just provide and validate, and maybe it's just the confirmation, Tom, over email that those numbers for total revenues are
Include
based on
40%.
actual?
They definitely are, but
They are?
yeah, they are. I mean, I just if you do the math on this, they have, otherwise that condo would have been evaluated at exactly 200,000. And then the single family, if the single family 3-bedroom, they have at revenues at 3,800. That would be
$250.
that'd be a $250,000 house, which doesn't exist.
But to that point,
Yeah.
they took an excerpt from the Camoin report and included it in. the
Yes,
exemption.
yeah,
It might be helpful to see the actual
Yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Then, I'm
Yeah.
sure they outlined assumptions and
yeah. Well, this with we have this with appendices from not this year's CEA report out, but last year's CEA report out. So we have this with background appendices.
Okay.
So I can dig that out and send it to all of us.
Yeah. that'd be-
And I apologize if it didn't even dawn on me when, you and I've talked about this already. Yeah, so I think we still should reach out to the Downs, but I also know we have this
Okay.
with like 8 pages of assumptions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I just, it's their first time they report out for the CA. That chart's not new, it's old.
Okay.
So they just stole that from their first I believe so, Tom?
Yeah, I think
This
so.
is just stolen from their first CA report out, because you had just come on, I think, or we had requested that the first CA report out was very ROI focused. Even though in the CEA, it does not speak to that. It speaks to much of what we got this year.
Mhm.
So last year was a little bit of them meeting us in the middle because we specifically asked, can you pull this stuff together?
Mhm.
And then, so this year felt different because they were trying to follow the CEA more to the letter of the CEA. And the first year they reported out, they were kind of helping us because I kept reporting back to them, hey, we can see the buildings. All right, can you give us some of this? So there's more meat on that bone than all.
I think that presentation is right on the website, but if not.
Yeah, okay.
Certainly share it around.
yeah, so it might be just reorganized.
Yep, it might be worth, if it is there, let's post it in this agenda. Again, maybe update this agenda, so.
Okay, good. Are you ready to move on? All right, next up, we have the quarterly and monthly financial reports. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look through them. Thank you, Tom. Had any questions while we have Ruth here? I can start.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
One thing that when I was looking through the monthly reports that I thought might be helpful, and I don't know how easy it is to add, would be to incorporate a prior year to date expended or percent expended. And the reason I asked that was when I looked at Public Works, their revenues, I think it seemed to be tracking below plan, and I couldn't tell if that was real or if it was just because of the way we book revenue for Public Works.
It might have to do with their billing cycle or how they bill, but yeah, we can check on that. I'm not sure we can do the prior year without some significant manual manipulation,
Okay.
but we can try some different reports and see what we can come up with.
Or maybe another report would have that information.
Another, yeah.
And I know you wrote the quarterly report. I did read it. And I appreciate you pulling that together. Any highlights that you wanted to share, Bruce?
Not too much, during the month, the quarter ended September, we did set the commitment, we set the tax rate. So that was nice. It came in below what the town had anticipated for a tax rate increase. As folks know, it was only a 1.08% increase. So that was nice. The town also issued bonds totaling about $3.7 million for various CIP projects. And then I talked about some various different things regarding like the American Rescue Plan. We did receive half of our monies, which I think Tom had spoken to earlier. And most of the departments are pretty much on track with where they're supposed to be. I mean, we assume a 25% expenditure or revenue collection rate. Excise is a little high, so that's good, but I'm not sure that we're gonna sustain that overall, so.
You said that
You
every
can't buy
time.
a car, though. I don't understand.
Just a quick point of order. I think the one on the website doesn't have this added. Can we just add that? Because did you request this later or?
It's it's on the agenda under item 4, and they're hyperlinks.
Oh, got it. So it's separate from the packet.
The links are in the packet.
Did you look at the agenda?
Yeah, I got the agenda. Yep, that's fair. I got it. Thank you. Sorry, I got confused.
Liam, can you? pull up the
Otherwise, it'd be
agenda?
700 pages long. Yeah,
That's-
okay.
that's-
The monthly in particular. is
Yeah,
very
okay.
lengthy. Quarterly is very
A little
short.
bit more.
I stand down.
And Ruth, just to let you, I did actually use the reports to try to do some research on the highest TIF today and see what was in there for funding, and it helped me.
Yeah,
So it may not be pretty, but there's information there when you get used to kind of looking for it or looking at it.
and then there's some a little bit of negatives in terms of community services expenditures are a little bit higher spent. Not that much, 27% spent. And the revenues are only at 24% spent, but I think some of that has to do with, when they actually collect the revenues. So some of the revenues were collected in FY '21 and some of their expenditures are in FY '22. So there's a little bit of a disconnect because of the timing of the revenues.
Yeah, there's some natural cycles that all departments don't necessarily adhere to in terms of, Public Works is spending a lot of money over the summer months, getting all salt and sand in their shed, so all of that's kind of front-ended. On the revenue side, it matters when some of this intergovernmental money comes in, reimbursements for this or that. So, yeah, at the end of the first quarter, 25% is an obvious bogey to use, but it doesn't always make sense in real life. I get a little more concerned when you're at end of quarter 3 into quarter 4, when you get some notable variances, but a couple percent higher or lower than 25 doesn't concern me this early in the fiscal year.
Public Works revenues, most of it comes from internal sources, right? So either police, gas, or school department. Do you book those once a year, or do you accrue enter them monthly? How does that work?
It depends on how Public Works bills. I think they've been trying to bill on a monthly basis. They bill not just the town departments, but they also have outside municipalities that they provide services to. So they get billed on a monthly basis, and that gets sent to the departments, who then approve what Public Works is asking, just like any other invoice. And then we get those back and we process journal entries.
Okay.
Charging the department and crediting Public Works for their revenues.
Thank you.
There's also vehicle maintenance for outside to other communities, particularly for fire, but there's some other as well. That did tail off considerably during COVID. I think it's kind of picking back up. We've actually just picked up Westbrook, which is going to help our cause in that regard as well. I think we're back to where we were before.
And then the only other thing that I had put in here was that our police chief, as everybody knows, has retired, and also the deputy finance director, Gina Cookie, she retired after 32 years. Robbie was here over 40.
Mhm.
So, and I think we've replaced Gina with Christy Bradbury. I think everyone's met her, and I'm not sure about the police chief position, so I'll let Tom talk to that one.
Ruth, I love your reports. Every time I look at the data first, and then I have a lot of questions, and then I read your summary and you answer my questions in the summary. So usually it's in there, and I love your footnotes. But the one thing that you mentioned, and I'm only bringing this up because somebody said something to me the other day, was how our total debt is now at 96 million. Somebody told me, and I've heard this before, and I'm just looking for, is this a rumor, or is this true, that Scarborough has the highest debt compared to any other town, or I don't know exactly what the statement was, but there is this notion that our debt relative to something is the highest in the state. Is that true?
Maybe it's per capita. I'm not sure.
I wouldn't be
can-
surprised if we have one of the highest debt per capita in the state.
I'm sure that, Portland and Bangor, in terms of total outstanding debt, are probably have to be higher than ours, but
Debt per capita?
it's probably the per capita, because.
And
Well, we're getting a lot more people, so we're driving that
Yeah,
down.
that'll go down.
And we've been refunding, we've done some advanced refundings. Otherwise, I think this would have been over 100,000,
100 million.
100 million, excuse me, and so.
Wasn't it 102 or 103 a year or so ago? So we're going the right
Okay,
direction,
that's
but
good. And then, just in terms of like our fiscal policy and the ceiling we have in terms of debt, like what's the balance that we have left before we're at issue with our fiscal policy on debt,
You'd be sick if you heard that number.
it's not even
Okay.
It's over 200 million.
yeah, way.
Well, I'm just thinking of
Yes.
all the things that are in the pipeline, right? New school, library, like that it might not take that long to get there.
Yeah.
So there's a
I-
couple of
I
triggers.
could-
One is how debt service as a percentage of your operating budget, and then other one is as a percentage of your state valuation
Mhm.
or assessed valuation.
So we're not quite there yet, but we have some big investments coming that could really get us close to that high end that I just,
That's the state's limits, but we also have a municipal limit, and we might get close to that one.
okay.
But we've also been working on our capital to try and not borrow as much and put that towards the capital program, so.
The reality is this community is always going to be around $100 million for the foreseeable future. And the way we've tried to manage it is to keep it as consistently at that amount as possible. I mean, the reality of us with a growing community like we are, every time we retire debt, we're taking on new debt. So it's up or down around $100 million. So to the extent that we can keep our annual debt service costs fairly flat without peaks and valleys, that's how to maintain kind of level tax rates, if you will. And given our very favorable bond ratings, given our fiscal capacity with our valuation, it doesn't appear that any of our bondholders or the rating agencies are terribly concerned by that amount. It's a jarring number. I appreciate that, but we've got the capacity to handle it. We've demonstrated that time and time again.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of the story that I don't think the public fully understands. And I'd like to be a little bit smarter on, just because I think that question comes up and I would like to be able to respond appropriately with what, we're in a good space, right? Like
Mhm.
we're at a good place, even though that number is high and can be jarring. Like at least where we are right now and how we're managing our debt service, it's really not impacting taxes quite as much or as bad as it could. But again, with these requests in the pipeline, that could change it. And so we just need to think about that a little bit.
So this is why you use debt for some things. It's maybe 12, 13% of our operating budget consistently, right? So, and that's how you can smooth things out. So let's say you need to take on a school that's 60 million, while your total debt outstanding might be, might go up to 150 or 100, I don't know. It probably won't be that bad because it won't happen for a couple of years, but you can change the duration of the bonds that you might, or your mix, you might be able to refund, but you can try to manage to that 12, 13%. so that you're not hitting there's not a perceived impact on taxpayers.
Mhm.
That's the strategy we've employed historically, and I think it's worked fairly well. You know, we know of all the debt we carry, we can look into the future, we know when it's all due. And we'll know when there's opportunity to take on additional debt. So part of those large capital projects, we ought to be very mindful of when can we do that, so it's kind of to smooth out the impact.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ruth. Next week, if you're just joining us or you looked at the agenda earlier in the week, we did add an item today related to our fire truck that was in our capital improvement plan and was approved by the voters recently. Tom,
I think Liam's going to handle it.
Liam has a proposal for us, and we did update the package to include some supporting details.
Thanks, Tom and Councilor Clucci. I think that the back up a little bit. We in the CIP budget for FY22, we included a replacement fire truck, which was approved by the voters just earlier this month. Originally, we had earmarked or identified a fire truck out of our North Scarborough station that was due for replacement. But due to a variety of factors, not least of which supply chain issues, which everyone's heard of, escalating costs associated with that, the delays, what Chief Thurlow is proposing to do is to actually replace a different fire truck in another station by utilizing the same bid specifications we utilized in 2019 to replace a truck down at Pine Point that we just received delivery of this past summer. The benefits of this approach are obviously we expedite the replacement. We move it from a 17 or 18 month replacement schedule with engineering to about a 10 to 12 month delivery schedule. And we actually will stand to save money over the CIP budget that we had proposed, about $30,000 or so. So we save some money, it costs us less money, we save some time, and we replace a truck that otherwise was probably due for replacement in a few years. So it would be a different fire truck. We didn't, and speaking with Chief Thurlow, we never identified what truck would be replaced. So it's not like we were sort of a bait and switch here with the voters, but it's essentially moving up or reshuffling our replacement schedule for our fire apparatus so that we can expedite the process. Our purchasing policy does allow for such a mechanism, presuming council approves it. But that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what we're proposing to do. We can execute documents. This is a preferred provider. We've actually purchased our last 2 fire trucks through this company. So we've already gone through and looked at contract language. Obviously, we have 2 we have 1 truck that's been delivered. We have another one in process. Been extremely happy with the vendor. And it allows us to move forward with a replacement that won't otherwise have cost escalators we anticipate we'd have if we went out to a competitive bid process, and turns it around quickly.
Go ahead, Paul.
Liam, do you know, it might have been in Chief Thurlow's memo, which I admittedly haven't read, so I apologize. Is there any depreciation, a value left to be depreciated against the one that would be bumped up, so to speak? Are we losing money on that end? Because
So the truck that we would be replacing is we have essentially it's a, for lack of a better phrase, a spare truck. So we'd still replace that one. We'd actually we shuffle around our trucks. So if you look at our apparatus replacement schedule, we're actually moving from essentially a 1 truck model, pumper model. We're actually now earmarking 2 different types. One that's a smaller wheelbase, which actually is better designed to work around some of our newer developments. So that's the one that we just delivered to Pine Point. This would be an identical truck for that. There's another one, another sort of model, which is a larger truck that will be deployed out of some of our northern stations. Again, it's a more rural district, so it's a heavier pumper with a bigger tank. So we're actually going to shuffle around some of those things. So I don't think that really answers your question, but we're going to move our spare truck to North Scarborough. We'll replace the truck that's due to be cycled out. Will still get cycled out. It's just shuffling around where this new truck is going to go. I think that's the biggest takeaway for us is, again, quicker turnaround time within budget, and still allows us to cycle out the truck that's due to be cycled out.
do you know, in our communication efforts, because they're quite plenty,
Mhm.
right? Especially, I think one of the things that we've done as a council is, did we did we make it clear what fire truck we're replacing and in the know in the Scarborough Leader and in our, and in Allison's newsletter?
We did not specify what station the truck would be assigned to.
Okay, all right.
Yep, so we haven't.
Okay.
It
So last year, we were specific about it because it was a bigger one.
was a ladder truck. Yep.
And that's what I was trying to think through as
Yeah.
well, and I can't recollect.
There's a really good letter on the website that Chief Thurlow wrote. Because I read that before, just to make sure.
Yeah,
that there was
right,
Nothing
yeah.
like that in there, and it was pretty general, and I think he did a good job. You know, because that was kind of one of my questions, like, could this be perceived as a shift? And it, you know, reading the communications that he wrote that's out there, like, I think he's been pretty consistent.
This new truck will be assigned to Pleasant Hill. That truck was due to be replaced in a few years' time anyway. So essentially, it's just, again, looking at all the other challenges we have with supply chains and delivery and cost escalators. This is a quick way to utilize the same specifications. Again, there's value to using the same provider as well. There's standardization for Public Works that has to work on it, parts, et cetera. So that's another, again, sort of an opportunity that we otherwise wouldn't have without these other pressures.
To answer Counselor Johnson.
Thank you. Yes, yeah.
question,
yeah.
Perhaps, is I know Public Works will take a look at all of the different vehicles. that
Yeah.
they want to trade in or whatever, and they might go out to someone and like Gov Deals, I think is the name of one of the vendors, and they'll sell them for us, and then we allocate those revenues. to
Yeah.
the Department, have the vehicle. I don't know if this would qualify or not, but that's something we've done in the past.
So we're still going to be bidding out the same truck. That's not changing. It's just a question of what truck, because we're going to be shifting around with a spare truck that's a floater that's going to
It's
shift.
the same truck,
I believe it's the same
but
truck.
it's really about where it's going to be.
Right, where the new one's going
The
to be
shinier object will be in Pleasant Hill instead of Dunston.
instead of North
North
Scarborough.
Okay, and then North Scarborough will get a shiny object a little bit later than
A
expected.
little bit later, but they're still going to get a different truck deployed to the station, which is newer, which is more serviceable. We're still getting rid of the
Because you're cycling a better one to North
spare
Scarborough.
truck. That's
Okay.
I think it's getting confused. The vehicle that we're cycling out is always the vehicle that we needed to replace.
Okay.
We're simply shuffling apparatus around. But the vehicle that needs to be replaced is the one that's gonna be sold.
Okay, we're not replacing a separate vehicle.
No,
It's just a matter of,
we've probably given you too much information. in terms
Chief
of how we
Thurlow is
deploy
taking
it.
upon himself to change, to reallocate where certain trucks are.
Yeah, where we deploy those resources is changing slightly, but we're still replacing the same vehicle that we always intended.
Which isn't really the question. The question is, are we doing a no bid process to save some money and get it done eight months sooner?
Yeah, so I was gonna try to bring.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
All this stuff is, you know, there's a reason we pay Chief Thurlow. and
Yes,
Tom
yeah,
and Leah to do this stuff. The question is, there's some savings and expediency that can be afforded if we waive the bid process. I think that's really the question is, by Tom's reading, it sounded like in his memo that, you know, he didn't think he really needed it, but kind of would like it. And I guess my feedback is the way I read it is you need it, and I give it, you know, I support it. And I don't know if anybody else has kind of had.
I think the thing we'd be sensitive to is, again, I think in Tom's memo, he speaks to this. It's really, we have an opportunity to utilize the same bids that we already vetted. We have the opportunity through this vendor to essentially order a second truck with
Okay.
looking at the same bid process. The initial bid process back in 2019, we received 7 bids through 6 different vendors. It was extremely time intensive. It, you know, went to the truck committee. All the specifications and engineering to put into that truck that we just received delivery on were extensive. So we're really comfortable purchasing a replica truck with that and saving the money and cost and time associated with it.
And the price difference from the vendor is like, it's escalated 2% a year somewhere.
Yeah, 5.3%, I think overall, over 2 years. Yep, and then we save roughly 4.3 or 4.3% over what we budgeted in the capital plan.
So it's not necessarily fair to call this no bid because you've done this process before. So, you know,
I would say we're piggybacking on
It's
a
a-
prior competitive bid process as opposed to simply not going to bid and picking a vendor for choice.
I agree with Counselor Clucci. I mean, the procurement person in me who worked for the government for 10 years in acquisition is like, we need to compete it. But I think the history that you shared and reading the policy, it seems like it makes sense to just move forward with the recommendation by Chief Thurlow.
I guess what I'd say in speaking with Chief Farrow today is, if the truck that we originally thought we would replace was really, if we didn't have some other options available and there weren't the other pressures around delivery delays and really a fear around escalation of costs, if we did go through another whole bid process, perhaps this would be a different approach. I think, again, it's an opportunity for the council to consider and move forward for all those other reasons.
I have one more question. Is there savings in the fact that it's from the same, because these are all built from the ground up, right? So I'm sure there's maintenance savings down the road that aren't super easy to articulate, but at least you're dealing with the same vendor for several different trucks.
There is actually some savings by ordering the same truck. I mean, it's nominal in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking $8,000 in discounts, but yeah, again, there are some other, I think there are other savings in terms of bulk purchasing of parts, things
Yeah,
like that.
right.
There's some
Familiarity
consistency.
for our crew, filters,
That's what I'm saying, like
belts,
the
those
maintenance
sorts of things,
workers,
pumps. The big savings with the vendor is that we don't need to go back through the full-blown engineering. I mean, these are custom built, and so they typically work with the client and engineer this out and build it out for you. We get all the way to manufacturing right out of the gate, basically.
I was doing the Googling earlier because I was just curious about this, and what I was reading was like, it can easily cost up to $1 million for a truck. And Lewiston recently spent $1 million on their truck. So the fact that ours is coming in at what it is seems like a really good deal. I don't know if those numbers are 100%
Well,
accurate. That was the Google.
yeah, I mean-
And so
They're all different
Yeah,
trucks.
yeah, that's what I read. I read that. So I mean, it
We
seems
did
like we're doing
spend
the right thing.
1.2, I think, on a fire truck last year, so we
Yeah.
have the capacity as well. But this is I think the other thing that's important to note is there have been some discussions through the budget process and the capital plan about these new developments and the challenges of some of these new developments, be able to navigate them. And that's been a real concern of the public safety department. And this most recent truck down to Pine Point, the only time I've been in it was actually Chief Thurlow winding through the development of
Village.
Eastern Village, which everyone knows is very tight, and he could bring up, a $750,000 fire truck through those corners. This will be the exact same. So in terms of responding to some of those newer developments, this is really more of a modern truck that we really need.
Makes sense.
So I think the question before, or for us, is do you feel like Tom needs to bring this to the full council for approval, or that he could just do it? I think that's what he's kind of looking for our interpretation or opinion on.
I think he does, and I'd be willing to support it. So I think we should pass it along with our recommendation. It is Wednesday today. I'd be okay as chair putting it on the full council meeting on, it's not Friday yet, so we could put this into the packet, so to speak, for next Wednesday. So I'd be comfortable doing that. I think the three of us can speak to the fellow councilors pretty articulately. I think Lamb can come back. And I think lead with the, don't bury the lead. It's the same truck we're replacing,
That's rehearsal.
Yeah, right.
It's nice to take some swings.
Johnny, are you there?
Yeah, it is just curious though that our policy just doesn't make it clear that for certain, like we have some dollar thresholds in here, but for going outside of the bidding process, which again, this makes sense. It's not explicit of what should go to the town councilor, what shouldn't.
Yeah.
So if, reading this, I don't think it's not clear, but I think to your point, it's probably just given the dollar value of it, of the decision, that it makes sense to go to the council.
Yeah, I view this as kind of belt and suspenders. I think the policy has an opportunity for involvement in the council, and I think there's enough gray here that I would feel more comfortable getting a validation. I'm still struggling with what the council motion is. I don't think, in my mind, it's not to waive the competitive bidding, because I think we are piggybacking on, in fact, a legitimate bid process that we conducted already. So it's maybe affirming my decision or something. So I've got to think more about the wordsmithing of that action item.
So my 2 cents would be to just waive it. And I think you've made the case for waiving it. What I worry about by drawing the correlation between something we did 2 years ago is, well, heck, didn't we go to the voters 10 years ago or 15 years ago for the turf and track? Why don't we did that? Why don't we, where do you draw the line, right? This is a new project. It's a new item. There's clearly in the policy, there's that it's there for a reason, right? You need some people who are not as close to it as you to say, yeah, that does make sense. And I think this is a good opportunity to do that. And I actually agree. I would like it to come out of finance with a recommendation. I don't know if you want to make a motion.
Sure, I'll make a motion that to I'll make a motion to put this particular item, however, it is wordsmithed on the agenda for next Wednesday's meeting.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? And it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Do we have any members of the public that are not in the room?
We have two members. We have a to be seated counselor and a deputy finance director. I'm not sure if anyone wishes to speak. I'm seeing no
If you'd like
hands.
to speak, just raise your hand. I can't see you, but Liam will welcome you in.
Seeing none.
Okay, seeing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor? All right.